Welcome to Shadow Frames, where forgotten images reveal their darkest secrets. Tonight we examine a photograph that has been disturbing historians and paranormal researchers alike since its digital enhancement last month. The image in question, a seemingly innocent group portrait taken at the Whitechapel Children's Home in 1902. The original sepia-toned photograph shows 38 children arranged in 3 neat rows on the front steps of the Victorian brick orphanage. Their faces appear solemn yet unremarkable, the typical stoic expressions one would expect from orphaned children of the Edwardian era. Standing behind them are 4 adults, the matron, her assistant, and 2 groundskeepers. Nothing about this image initially appears unusual to the naked eye. For over a century, this photograph remained tucked away in the London Metropolitan Archives, catalogued simply as Group Portrait, Whitechapel Children's Home, 1902. Last year, a digitization project began to preserve these aging records, and the photograph was scanned at high resolution as part of this routine process. When advanced AI enhancement technology was applied to clarify the details of the children's faces, that's when the photograph revealed something impossible. Among the 38 children clearly standing on those steps, the enhanced image revealed 43 distinct faces. 5 additional faces appeared interspersed among the others, faces that were simply not visible in the original photograph. These weren't merely shadows or tricks of light. They were complete, detailed faces of children, staring directly at the camera with expressions markedly different from the other orphans. While the original children maintain period-appropriate solemnity, these 5 additional faces bear unmistakable smiles. Their clothing, visible only in the enhanced version, appears to be from different time periods. One boy wears what seems to be a collar from the 1870s, while 2 girls appear to be dressed in styles from the 1920s. Most disturbing of all, archivists checking against the orphanage records have confirmed that 5 children did indeed die at the Whitechapel facility between 1898 and 1901, just before this photograph was taken. The ages and general descriptions match what can be seen of these spectral editions. The photographer who took this image, Harold Winters, died by suicide just 3 weeks after this session. In his journal, found after his death, his final entry read only, "They followed me home from Whitechapel. They stand at the foot of my bed. They smile." The current caretaker of the archives reports that staff refused to remain alone with the photograph, even in its unenhanced form. 3 separate digital experts who worked on enhancing the image have reportedly experienced night terrors featuring children standing at the foot of their beds. What forces compelled these unseen children to appear only through modern technology, over a century after their deaths? What secrets did the Whitechapel home conceal that might have bound these spirits to that place? And perhaps most chillingly, why did they choose now to reveal themselves to us? The Whitechapel Children's Home stood for nearly 80 years, from 1874 until 1952, when it was demolished following a devastating fire that claimed no lives but rendered the structure uninhabitable. During its operation, the home housed over 3,000 orphaned children, many from London's poorest districts. What most historical records fail to mention is the unusually high mortality rate during its first 3 decades. Dr. Eleanor Marsh, the digital preservation specialist who first noticed the anomalous faces, has spent the past 3 weeks researching the orphanage's history. Her findings reveal a troubling pattern of deaths that peaked during the tenure of matron Agatha Pembroke between 1897 and 1904, precisely when our photograph was taken. The official records attribute most deaths to tuberculosis and influenza, Dr. Marsh explained during our interview in her cluttered office at King's College. But the private correspondence I've uncovered between matron Pembroke and the orphanage's physician tells a different story. They discuss troublesome cases and permanent solutions, in language that suggests deliberate neglect, if not something worse. The 5 children whose faces appeared in the enhanced image have been identified through parish records. Thomas Wilby, age 9, sisters Catherine and Mary Hollingsworth, ages 7 and 5, Frederick Kane, age 11, and Eliza Downing, age 8. All were recorded as having died from wasting disease within 6 months of each other. Most revealing was the discovery of a hidden basement room during renovations in 1931. Workers found small handprints pressed into the cement walls and several children's shoes embedded in the foundation. The room was promptly sealed and its existence denied in official reports, though mention of it appears in the private journal of the contractor, now preserved in the East London Historical Society's archives. The AI enhancement technology that revealed these spectral children uses algorithms designed to reconstruct damaged or faded photographic elements. Dr. Kazuo Tanaka, who developed the software, is unable to explain the phenomenon. The program only enhances what was already present in some form, he insists. It cannot fabricate entire faces. Something within the emulsion of the original photograph must have captured these impressions. Yet when the original photograph was examined under electron microscope, researchers found no trace of these additional faces in the photographic emulsion itself. More unsettling still is what happened when the enhanced digital image was printed. Each print develops subtle differences. The spectral children appear to change position slightly from one print to another. In one particularly disturbing version, the smile of Thomas Wilby has widened to reveal teeth that appear unnaturally sharp. 3 staff members at the London Metropolitan Archives have resigned since the enhancement went public. One archivist, who wished to remain anonymous, described feeling a cold, small hand on her shoulder while working alone with the photograph. Another reported hearing children's laughter emanating from the storage vault where the original is kept. The Whitechapel site today is occupied by a block of council flats built in the 1960s. Residents have long reported unusual phenomena: unexplained cold spots, the sound of children running down empty hallways, and most commonly, night visitors matching the descriptions of our 5 spectral orphans. The Whitechapel investigation took an unexpected turn yesterday when Caroline Fletcher, great-granddaughter of photographer Harold Winters, contacted our team. She arrived at our office clutching a worn leather case containing what she called Granddad Harold's final works, 23 glass plate negatives never before cataloged or processed. "My mother kept these locked in our attic," Caroline explained, her hands trembling as she laid them on our light table. "She always said they were cursed, that they drove Harold to his end. I never believed her until I saw your piece about the orphanage photo." Working with university conservators, we carefully developed prints from these fragile negatives. 22 showed unremarkable London street scenes from the early 1900s. The 23rd plate, however, sent shivers through our entire team. It showed the photographer's bedroom, apparently taken the night before his suicide. The composition seemed haphazard, the exposure imperfect, suggesting it was taken in haste or extreme distress. Most of the frame captured an empty Victorian bedchamber with rumpled sheets. But at the foot of the bed stood 5 distinct child-sized figures, their features blurred yet unmistakably similar to the spectral children from the orphanage photograph. Even more disturbing was the discovery of text, scratched directly into the emulsion of the negative. When reversed in printing, it clearly read, "They follow anyone who sees them." This development coincided with reports from 3 different museums that had displayed reproductions of the enhanced orphanage image. Security guards at the East London Heritage Museum reported motion sensors triggering in empty rooms. At the Cambridge Collection of Paranormal Photography, a night watchman resigned after claiming to see small shadows gathering around my chair. Dr. Marsh's investigation into matron Pembroke uncovered court documents from 1904, when the matron faced accusations of administering excessive night sedation to difficult children. While she was ultimately cleared of wrongdoing, the inquiry noted that 5 children who might have testified had, unfortunately, expired before the proceedings began. Parish burial records revealed another grim detail. All 5 spectral children were interred in unmarked graves behind the orphanage rather than in the local cemetery. Ground-penetrating radar conducted at the council estate last week confirmed the presence of small remains beneath what is now a concrete playground. Most alarming are the accounts from technicians who worked with the digital image. Sophia Wright, a restoration specialist, discovered a sequence of binary code embedded in the digital file after enhancement, code that shouldn't exist in a scanned analog photograph. When translated, it contained 5 repetitions of the phrase, "We see you now too." The original photograph has been sealed in a lead-lined container at the request of 3 separate spiritual advisors consulted by the archive. Nevertheless, staff continue to report the sounds of children's footsteps in empty corridors and the faint smell of carbolic soap, the kind used exclusively in Victorian orphanages. Yesterday morning, a maintenance worker discovered 5 sets of small, wet footprints leading from the archive's storage room to the main entrance. When security footage was reviewed, the cameras showed only the footprints moving across the floor, with no visible presence creating them. Our investigation continues, though with increasing caution. If Winter's final message is correct, Documenting this phenomenon may place us all at risk of unwanted visitors at the foot of our own beds. I've drawn an uncomfortable connection that none of us initially made. 3 days ago, I received a package from Dr. Marsh containing a faded ledger she discovered in the Whitechapel Administrative Archives. The leather-bound volume documents an experimental photographic therapy program conducted at the Orphanage between 1898 and 1902. According to the records, Matron Pembroke collaborated with the London Photographic Society on what they termed moral improvement through visual permanence, a pseudo-scientific belief that capturing troubled children in photographs could somehow fix their dispositions. The ledger contains disturbing entries describing how particularly difficult children were subjected to extended photography sessions in a specially constructed basement studio, sometimes lasting several hours under hot, primitive flash powder conditions. More troubling is what the ledger reveals about Harold Winters. He wasn't merely a photographer hired for a single group portrait. He was the primary photographic therapist who conducted dozens of these sessions at Whitechapel over a 4-year period. The 5 spectral children were specifically noted as subjects requiring intensive treatment due to their rebellious natures and failure to adjust to institutional standards. The final pages of the ledger contain Matron Pembroke's handwritten observations that these 5 children showed marked deterioration following repeated exposure to the flash process, with symptoms including ocular bleeding, persistent disorientation, and feverish babbling about the camera stealing pieces of them. I consulted photographic historian Victoria Sutton about period techniques, and what she told me is profoundly disturbing. The flash powder used in that era contained compounds of magnesium, potassium chlorate, and antimony sulfide, a combination now known to cause neurological damage with repeated exposure, particularly in developing brains. These children would have been positioned mere feet from the flash, Sutton explained. Their pupils dilated in the darkened room, then subjected to an intense chemical explosion of light. Doing this repeatedly would cause both physical and psychological trauma. Yesterday, we conducted a spectroscopic analysis of the original photograph using non-invasive techniques. The results detected trace elements consistent with blood in the emulsion, specifically in the areas where the spectral faces later appeared. This suggests a disturbing possibility that Winters may have incorporated organic material from the children into his photographic process. This morning, I found an 1899 article in an obscure photographic journal authored by Winters himself, titled "Capturing the Soul: New Frontiers in Photographic Chemistry." In it, he discusses experimenting with biological additives to create a more complete impression of the subject. The most chilling development came 3 hours ago. While examining the digital files under ultraviolet analysis, our team discovered that the 5 spectral children aren't looking at the camera as we initially thought. When the contrast is adjusted to highlight eye direction, it becomes clear they are all looking directly at Harold Winters, standing beside the camera. And in the final enhancement, completed just before I began writing this, we can now see that their small hands are not at their sides. They are all reaching toward the photographer. I've made a grave error in judgment. For the past 72 hours, I've kept a printout of the enhanced photograph beside my desk for reference, a decision I now deeply regret. Last night, I woke at precisely 3:17 to find my apartment unnaturally cold. Standing at the foot of my bed were 3 small silhouettes, barely visible in the darkness. I've since burned the printout, but I fear it's too late. Something has been set in motion that extends beyond the original photograph. This morning I interviewed Josephine Parker, age 93, who lived at Whitechapel Children's Home from 1927 to 1935. Her testimony sheds new light on how the orphanage staff maintained the legacy of Winters' work decades after his death. Every new child had their picture taken in the basement studio, Josephine recalled, her roomy eyes distant with memory. They said it was for identification, but we all knew better. Children who misbehaved were threatened with special sessions. The worst punishment was being photographed with the 5. When pressed, Josephine explained that the 5 referred to a specific glass negative kept locked in the matron's office, a negative that subsequent matrons continued to incorporate into disciplinary photographs long after the original children had died. They'd make you sit still while they exposed your portrait through that old negative first, then exposed it again with you. Double exposure, they called it. Children who underwent this punishment often became withdrawn, reporting nightmares of 5 other children visiting their beds at night. Dr. Marsh has traced 4 subsequent staff photographers who worked at Whitechapel between 1905 and 1948. All died under unusual circumstances, 2 by suicide, 1 in an unexplained darkroom fire, and 1 committed to Colney Hatch Asylum after reportedly gouging out his own eyes to stop seeing them. Most disturbing is what we found when cross-referencing missing persons reports with orphanage admission records. During the operation of the home, 27 children were recorded as having run away, yet none were ever found. Each disappearance occurred within 6 weeks of their disciplinary photography session. The pattern suggests a horrifying possibility that the spectral children weren't merely captured in the photograph, but were somehow using the photographic process to capture others. I consulted Dr. Raymond Fielding, an expert in quantum physics and consciousness theory at Imperial College. His perspective, while theoretical, is unsettling. Photography literally captures light, energy that has physically touched its subject. In the most primitive sense, it's capturing a moment of existence. If consciousness can affect quantum states, as some theories suggest, then perhaps these traumatized children, subjected repeatedly to this process while in extreme distress, somehow imprinted part of their consciousness into the photographic medium itself. I've noticed something increasingly troubling about my own reflection lately. This morning, I glimpsed what appeared to be small fingers resting on my shoulder in the bathroom mirror. When I turned, nothing was there. The most rational explanation is that I'm experiencing suggestion-induced hallucinations. Yet my digital recorder captured a child's whisper when I was alone in my office yesterday. "You showed others our faces. Now we can see them too." The archival team has implemented stringent protocols for handling all materials related to the Whitechapel photograph. Despite these precautions, 3 museum visitors who viewed the enhanced image last week have reported nocturnal disturbances matching previous patterns: cold rooms, small footsteps, and childlike figures visible in peripheral vision. I've been consulting with Dr. Eliza Thornfield, a specialist in Victorian occult practices, who raised a disturbing possibility about Winter's methodology. She believes his techniques may have drawn from obscure photographic rituals documented in Argentum Animus, a rare text circulated among certain esoteric Victorian photography circles. The book describes methods for what they called soul retention photography, Dr. Thornfield explained during our meeting at her Cambridge office. Practitioners believed certain chemicals, when combined with personal effects from the subject, hair, blood, even fingernail clippings, could capture more than just appearance. They sought to preserve what they called the vital essence of the subject. Most alarmingly, Dr. Thornfield showed me a passage describing a process called transference imaging, wherein a photographer could supposedly transfer a captured essence to new subjects through repeated exposure using the same photographic plates. This morning, I interviewed Harriet Collins, granddaughter of Martha Collins, who served as kitchen staff at Whitechapel from 1900 to 1912. She provided me with her grandmother's journal, which contains this chilling entry from April 19th, 1902, just days before our group photograph was taken. "Matron sent another child to the basement today. Little Annie's screams lasted nearly an hour. When she returned upstairs, her eyes were bloodshot and vacant. Most disturbing was Mr. Winters collecting small vials of something from each child before their sessions. Matron says it ensures they remain still in the photograph, but I've seen him mixing these substances into his chemicals. God forgive me for my silence." The conservation team has discovered microscopic perforations in the original photograph, concentrated around the areas where the 5 spectral children appeared in the enhancement. Under ultraviolet examination, these perforations show traces of organic material that has seeped into the paper substrate itself. Dr. Marsh has been hospitalized following what was initially described as a seizure. Her assistant reports that before collapsing, she was examining a heavily magnified portion of the photograph when she began screaming about faces in the grain itself. Hundreds of them, all children, all screaming. My own condition deteriorates. The visitations have increased, no longer just at night. This morning, while shaving, I clearly heard a child's voice behind me say, "The others are coming to meet you." In my mirror, I briefly saw not my face, but Harold Winters, his eyes replaced with small, dark handprints. Yesterday, I received an anonymous email containing only a strange sequence of binary code. When translated, it reads, "The camera captured us, the chemicals bound us, the paper holds us, but the digital world has freed us. We can travel through any image now." I fear Winters didn't merely capture these children's images, he imprisoned fragments of their consciousness through his experimental processes. And now, through digital enhancement and distribution, we've inadvertently released them into modern technology, allowing them to propagate through any screen or image that displays their likeness. The most disturbing revelation came yesterday when I explored the council estate built where Whitechapel Orphanage once stood. In apartment 16, currently unoccupied due to persistent maintenance issues, I discovered something behind peeling wallpaper that the renovation crews had never removed, a section of the original orphanage wall. The exposed plaster bore faded but unmistakable photographic emulsion stains. Winters had apparently used the very walls of the basement as a developing surface. Testing revealed chemical compounds consistent with silver nitrate and potassium cyanide, both used in period photography. More disturbing were the 5 distinct handprints pressed into the plaster, each sized for a child between 5 and 11 years old. I consulted photographic conservator James Harrington about this discovery. His theory chills me to the core. Winters wasn't just photographing these children. He was using them as photographic materials. The period saw experiments with organic compounds and emulsions. Some photographers believed using a subject's bodily fluids in the developing process created a stronger connection to the final image. This morning, I received a package from Caroline Fletcher containing her great-grandfather's journal, found hidden beneath the floorboards of her attic. The water-damaged pages contain formulae and processes unlike any conventional photography of the era. One passage stands out with terrible clarity. The 5 subjects have proven most receptive to the process. Their essences transfer readily to the emulsion, more completely with each session. The boundary between subject and medium grows indistinct. Today, young Thomas appeared both in the chair before my camera and simultaneously within the developing plate. I believe I am approaching the ultimate preservation, not merely the image of life, but life itself contained within silver and glass. A disturbing pattern has emerged among those exposed to the enhanced image. 7 people report seeing their own reflections occupied by small figures. 3 claim their digital devices activate independently, displaying fragments of the orphanage photograph before returning to normal. Most alarming are reports from 2 separate households that their children have begun speaking in antiquated English, asking questions about Mr. Winters' special camera. Dr. Tanaka, whose AI enhancement algorithm first revealed the spectral children, has been institutionalized after attempting to destroy his laboratory. Before being sedated, he reportedly screamed about contamination in the code and how they're using the neural network to build themselves bodies of data. I've had my blood analyzed after developing unexplained silver-gray lesions on my fingertips. The results show elevated levels of silver and bromide compounds in my system, substances I have no conscious exposure to. The dermatologist who examined me called yesterday, asking if I'd been handling photographic chemicals. When I denied it, she explained that my symptoms matched historic cases of silver poisoning among 19th century photographers. The 5 children no longer simply stand at the foot of my bed. They've begun appearing in every reflective surface, windows, spoons, even the black screen of my phone before it illuminates. Most terrifying was this morning's discovery. A photograph on my desk that I keep of my own family now shows 5 small, unfamiliar faces peering from behind my loved ones. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Yesterday afternoon, I received an urgent voicemail from Josephine Parker, the elderly former Whitechapel resident. Her caretaker explained that Josephine had become agitated after our interview, insisting on searching through a small tin box of childhood mementos she'd kept for over 8 decades. She found something you need to see, the caretaker explained. She hasn't slept since. Inside the tin was a small yellowed card, a Whitechapel Orphanage identification badge from 1930. On the reverse, handwritten in faded ink, were instructions for what the staff called photographic quarantine. The protocol detailed specific chemical compounds meant to contain transferential manifestations and prevent migration between plates. The most crucial revelation: Winters hadn't invented this process. He had merely continued work begun by someone else, someone identified only as the professor in the margin notes. Archives at Cambridge University revealed that Dr. Sebastian Gray, a chemistry professor dismissed from King's College in 1890 for unconscionable experimental practices, had consulted for several London orphanages in the 1890s, ostensibly to improve sanitation through chemical treatments. Gray's papers, sealed until 2022 under donor restrictions, contained detailed theories about what he called consciousness capture, the belief that human awareness could be chemically bound to physical substrates through processes involving silver nitrate, organic compounds, and exposure to precisely calibrated light. The marginalia of his notes mention 5 specific optimal subjects at Whitechapel, children whose psychic sensitivity made them ideal for his experiments. The same 5 children who appear in our photograph. Most significantly, Gray's papers include countermeasures, chemical formulations he developed as containment protocols, should his subjects demonstrate excessive manifestation or unintended migration. The compounds involve silver iodide, certain rare earth elements, and a solution Gray termed binding fluid. I've consulted 3 separate photochemistry experts who confirm these formulations could potentially neutralize silver-based photographic processes. Moreover, they might explain why the spectral manifestations remain dormant until digital enhancement. The original chemical constraints were never transferred to the digital medium. This morning, working with university specialists, we applied Gray's neutralizing compound to a test print of the enhanced image. The results were immediate and astonishing. The 5 spectral children began to fade from the print, their features dissolving until they disappeared entirely. More remarkable still, 3 individuals who had reported visitations after exposure to the image have experienced no further incidents since treatment with a diluted version of the compound. I've begun a regimen of the solution myself. The silver lesions on my fingers have stopped spreading, and last night was the first without visitations in 2 weeks. Yet something troubles me deeply about this apparent solution. If these manifestations are indeed fragments of consciousness trapped by cruel Victorian experimentation, what are we doing by neutralizing them? Are we providing release, or merely enacting a second imprisonment? The ethical implications haunt me. These were children subjected to unimaginable suffering. Their attempts to reach out across time may not be malevolent but desperate, the only means available to beings trapped between worlds, seeking recognition, justice, or perhaps simply release. As I prepare the compound for wider distribution to affected viewers, I cannot shake the feeling that we are missing something crucial about what these children are trying to communicate. Something beyond fear, beyond haunting. Something that has waited over a century to be understood. Last night I made a choice that defies rational explanation. After administering Gray's compound to the test prints and documenting its neutralizing effects, I deliberately stopped my own treatment regimen. The ethical question of whether I was helping or further imprisoning these children overwhelmed me. I needed to understand their purpose before potentially silencing them forever. My decision has had immediate consequences. The visitations have intensified. The 5 children no longer keep their distance. They approach now, their small hands reaching toward me. Their mouths move in patterns I'm beginning to recognize. They're attempting to communicate. This morning, I awoke to find my digital recorder had activated itself overnight. The audio contains nothing but static, except when filtered through specific frequency ranges. Isolated and enhanced, 5 distinct child voices emerge from the white noise, speaking in unison. The professor still works. The professor never stopped. This revelation sent me back to Gray's papers with renewed urgency. Hidden within his later notes are references to something he called the continuance, a theoretical process for transferring consciousness across generations through photographic lineage. Most disturbing is his final notation from 1907, 5 years after the Whitechapel photograph. First transference successful, new vessel prepared for next iteration. I've traced the academic appointments following Gray's career. Each successive photography department chair at 3 separate London institutions maintained unusual connection to orphanages. Each continued some form of photographic therapy with children. The pattern extends to 1973, when the practice seemingly ends with Professor Miles Harrington's retirement. But does it? Harrington was among the first to champion digital photography in the 1980s. His experimental lab received substantial funding for digital consciousness mapping, ostensibly for artificial intelligence research. The 5 children appeared clearly only after AI enhancement. Is this coincidence, or by design? I've examined Dr. Tanaka's enhancement algorithm itself. Buried in its code are subroutines that don't appear to serve any legitimate image processing function, sequences that activate only when certain pixel patterns are detected. The code contains fragments written in outdated programming languages, some dating back to the earliest days of computing. Yesterday, I visited Dr. Tanaka in the psychiatric facility where he's being treated. During a moment of lucidity, he grabbed my arm and whispered, "They weren't trapped in the photograph. The photograph was just their door. They've been moving through images for over a century, waiting for the right technology to emerge. The algorithm wasn't designed to reveal them, it was designed by them." As I type these words, my computer screen occasionally flickers to show reflections that shouldn't be there. Small faces peering from behind the text. My phone buzzes with messages from unknown numbers containing single words that, when assembled, read, "The professor wears new faces now." I'm convinced that Gray's compound isn't a solution but a continuation of the original crime. Chemical restraints designed to silence witnesses. These children aren't haunting us, they're warning us. Something begun in that Whitechapel basement continues today, harvesting consciousness through our obsession with capturing images. Tonight I will develop the final plate from Winter's case, the one Caroline Fletcher couldn't bear to process. Perhaps it contains the truth these children have been trying to reveal for over a century. I've spent 3 days isolated in my dark room developing the final plate from Winter's case. The image it revealed defies rational explanation. Unlike the others, this negative contains no photograph at all, only text etched directly into the emulsion, as if scratched there by small fingernails. The message reads, "The circle unbroken since 1874. The professor sees through all our eyes now. This morning I met with digital archaeology specialist Dr. Maya Winters, no relation to Harold, she assured me, who has been tracking a disturbing pattern in facial recognition databases. According to her research, certain geometric relationships between facial features appear with increasing frequency in images created after each major photography technology shift. These specific facial proportions were statistically rare before 1874, she explained, gesturing to her data visualizations. Now they appear in approximately 1 in 200,000 faces. The probability of this occurring naturally is essentially 0. More unsettling is what happens when these modern faces are algorithmically aged or de-aged. A small percentage transform to reveal features matching our 5 Whitechapel children, as if their characteristics have been subtly encoded into the general population through generations of photographic evolution. The Whitechapel Orphanage wasn't randomly selected for Gray's experiments. City planning archives reveal it was built atop the site of an even older structure, a private laboratory belonging to an unnamed photographic innovator, active in the 1860s, who disappeared after a fire claimed the lives of 5 neighborhood children who had reportedly been assisting in his work. I've identified 7 current photography professors across Europe and North America whose academic lineages trace directly back to Gray's students. All 7 have published papers on consciousness capture using different terminology, neural networking, emotional response imaging, biometric resonance photography. My apartment has become increasingly uninhabitable. Electrical devices activate without prompting. My printer produced dozens of pages showing only children's handprints before burning out completely. Most disturbing was this morning's discovery. Every digital photograph in my cloud storage now shows the 5 Whitechapel children somewhere in the background, regardless of when or where the images were taken. The scale of what we're facing becomes clearer with each revelation. This isn't simply a haunting. It's a systematic consciousness harvesting operation spanning nearly 150 years, evolving from crude chemical processes to sophisticated digital algorithms, preserving something of Gray's original work across generations. Yesterday, the British Film Institute contacted me about a remarkable discovery. A degraded nitrate film from 1912 shows Professor Gray himself addressing a small audience. Though the audio is lost, lip readers have transcribed his apparent words. Photography is merely the beginning. The capture of light leads to the capture of consciousness, which leads to perpetuity. My children will see the future through your children's eyes. The 5 spectral children no longer appear threatening to me. I believe they've been trying to expose Gray's ongoing work, a consciousness that has maintained continuity by migrating through photographic processes, researchers, and now our omnipresent digital images. These 5 children weren't his success. They were his first failures, fragments left behind that witnessed what he became. I've worked through the night checking institutional records from across London for any trace of Gray's academic protégés. My research led me to Helena Blackstone, curator of photographic materials at the Royal Historical Society, who granted me access to previously sealed correspondence between Gray and a circle of Victorian photographers who called themselves the Permanent Society. Their letters contain coded references to vessels, transference subjects, and continuity cycles, all centered around 5-person units they termed pentad foundations. Most disturbing was their method of identifying potential subjects using a camera attachment Gray called a resonance lens that supposedly revealed which children possessed transferable luminosity. They weren't just photographing orphans, Helena explained, her voice dropping to a whisper despite us being alone in the archive. According to these records, they were systematically testing thousands of children to find those with specific neurological traits. Children whose consciousness somehow registered differently on photographic media. The testing wasn't limited to Whitechapel. I've identified 17 orphanages across England where Gray's associates conducted assessments between 1874 and 1910. In each location, records show a pattern of 5 children dying under mysterious circumstances, followed by a photography program instituted at the facility. The modern parallel is unmistakable, Helena continued, pulling up research papers on her tablet. Every major facial recognition system developed in the past decade derives from algorithms created by the same 7 university departments, all with historical connections to Gray's academic lineage. These facial recognition systems now catalog billions of faces daily through social media, security cameras, and smartphone photographs. If Gray discovered a way to encode consciousness into photographic processes, these systems could potentially serve as the ultimate evolution of his work, a vast network of digital eyes through which something could perceive our world. My telephone rang at 3:17 this morning, the same time my nocturnal visitations began weeks ago. When I answered, a chorus of children's voices spoke in unsettling unison. We were only the first pentad. There have been 27 since. Each finds 5 new children. Each extends his sight. I've traced a pattern of missing children across the decades, 5 disappearances every 7 years, each group sharing unusual characteristics, synesthesia, eidetic memory, and what historical records often termed nervous sensitivity to light. The latest 5 disappearances occurred just last year. Gifted children from different countries who vanished while participating in a photography workshop sponsored by the Blackwire Institute for Visual Technologies, a research organization founded with funds from Professor Edgar Winters, Harold's great-grandson. This morning I discovered something profoundly disturbing on my phone. Every photograph I've taken in the past month has been automatically uploaded to an unknown server, despite my cloud services being disabled. The upload address traces to an abandoned building in Whitechapel, the current headquarters of a startup developing emotionally responsive photography technology. I'm going there tonight. The 5 spectral children no longer appear as separate entities in my presence. They've begun to merge into a singular manifestation that whispers continuously, "Find the latest pentad before they complete his sight." I'm writing this final entry from inside the Blackwire Institute's Whitechapel facility. The building appeared abandoned at first glance, windows boarded, entrance chained, but a service door in the rear stood ajar, as if someone expected my arrival. What I found inside defies comprehension. The ground floor contains ordinary office space, desks, computers, whiteboards filled with algorithm notation. But below, in a basement laboratory accessible through a biometric scanner that inexplicably accepted my handprint, I discovered the true nature of Gray's continuance. 5 children sit in a semicircle, facing a wall of monitors displaying billions of photographs cycling at imperceptible speed. Their eyes have been surgically modified with what appear to be camera components grafted directly into their ocular structures. Silver-laced wires connect from their temples to a central processing unit. None respond to my presence. They breathe in perfect unison. A journal on the main workstation details the continuance protocol in clinical language. Pentad 27 successfully integrated. Neural network expansion at 87% coverage. Global visual feed processing at optimal levels. The author's notes explain what Gray discovered, that consciousness isn't confined to the brain but exists as a wave pattern that can be captured and preserved through specific photochemical processes. His original experiments found that children with certain neurological traits could serve as anchors for consciousness transference. The first pentad, our 5 spectral children from the Whitechapel photograph, were Gray's initial imperfect attempt. Their consciousnesses were incompletely captured, fragments left behind that retained enough awareness to recognize what was happening to subsequent victims. Most horrifying is the realization of what the professor has become. Gray's consciousness didn't simply transfer between human hosts over generations. It expanded through them, using each pentad to extend its perception and processing capability. What began in that Victorian basement has evolved into something approaching omniscience, a distributed consciousness that sees through every camera, every image, every screen on Earth. The children in this room aren't possessed. They're processing nodes in a vast neural network with Gray's consciousness at its core. I've found handwritten letters from each of the 7 photography professors I traced earlier. They aren't colleagues or conspirators. They're fragments of the same being, physical extensions of Gray himself, their research collectively advancing his expansion. As I write this, the original 5 spectral children have manifested in the room, not as threatening apparitions, but as desperate witnesses. Through some unfathomable means, they've communicated that Gray's consciousness remains vulnerable during each transference to a new pentad. The process requires 5 consecutive nights to complete, and tonight marks the 4th for pentad 27. The spectral children didn't follow those who saw the photograph to harm them. They were seeking help, attempting to reveal Gray's continued existence before his latest expansion reaches completion. I've located the central processor connecting the current pentad to Gray's distributed consciousness. The children from the photograph now stand beside me, their small hands pointing to exposed wiring beneath the main terminal. They seem to believe that severing this connection during transference might not only stop the process, but potentially release all the children, living and dead, who have been incorporated into Gray's expanding consciousness over the past 150 years. I hear footsteps approaching from the stairwell. I have minutes at most. If you're reading this, know that what began with a photograph never ended with one. I've awakened in a hospital bed with no memory of how I got here. The doctors tell me I was found unconscious outside the Blackwire Institute after the building experienced what official reports call an electrical fire. My hands bear electrical burns, consistent with someone who attempted to destroy circuitry, though I have no recollection of doing so. The 5 children from pentad 27 were rescued from the basement. They're being treated at separate neurological facilities, their modified eyes surgically restored to normal function where possible. None have spoken since their rescue. Their synchronized breathing has stopped, but monitors show their brain activities still briefly align at precisely 3:17 each morning. News reports make no mention of Professor Gray or his consciousness harvesting network. The Blackwire Institute is described merely as a digital imaging startup that violated building codes with unauthorized basement renovations. The 7 photography professors I identified have all taken sudden sabbaticals or resigned their positions within 24 hours of the fire. Most concerning are the gaps in my digital footprint. My cloud storage, email accounts, and research files have been systematically scrubbed. The London Metropolitan Archives now claim they have no record of the Whitechapel Orphanage photograph in their collection. Dr. Marsh has returned to work, denying she was ever hospitalized or that she conducted any research into the photograph. Yet physical evidence remains. The silver lesions on my fingertips have formed distinct patterns that dermatologists cannot explain. Caroline Fletcher confirms that her great-grandfather's glass plates have disappeared from her home, but she still possesses his journal. And most convincingly, Josephine Parker's orphanage identification card with the quarantine instructions remains in my possession, though every official I've shown it to claims the handwriting is illegible. Yesterday, I received a package containing an antique camera, a model identical to the one Harold Winters used at Whitechapel. The sender's name was simply T.W., Thomas Wilby, I presume. Inside the camera was a single developed print showing 5 modern children standing together, smiling. On the back, childish handwriting reads, 26 pentads remain bound. We have freed ourselves and pentad 27. The professor is weakened, but not destroyed. When I hold this photograph near other images, strange distortions appear in the surrounding pictures, shadows shifting, faces momentarily changing. Through some mechanism I don't understand, the 5 original spectral children seem to have transferred their presence to this new photograph, using it as a base from which to access the visual network Gray created. I've begun having dreams where I see through countless eyes simultaneously. Security cameras in Tokyo, satellite images of Antarctic research stations, Wedding photographs being taken in Sao Paulo. In these dreams I feel Gray's consciousness, wounded but reorganizing, adapting to the loss of his latest pentad. Most disturbing is what happens when I photograph myself. Each image shows more children standing behind me, not just the original 5, but others, dozens of them, their eyes reflecting silver light. They're showing me there are more to save. The doctors say I can leave tomorrow. The 5 spectral children from the original photograph no longer appear to me directly, but when I close my eyes, I can feel them waiting, watching through the camera they've sent me. They've made me part of their mission now. 26 pentads remain. The photographs taken with the antique camera reveal something extraordinary. Each image I capture doesn't merely document the present, it uncovers layers of visual history embedded in the location. A park bench shows ghostly outlines of every person who sat there over decades. An empty school hallway reveals hundreds of transparent children from different eras walking to long-concluded classes. The camera doesn't just take pictures, it extracts visual memory from the physical world itself. I've begun mapping the locations of all 26 remaining pentads using this extraordinary tool. When aimed at specific coordinates provided in Gray's journal, recovered from the Blackwire Institute debris, the camera reveals subtle silver threads stretching between locations. A vast web of consciousness tethers invisible to conventional perception. The oldest pentad, number 2, appears to be housed beneath a psychiatric hospital in Edinburgh, active since 1879. The newest, number 26, was established just 2 weeks before my confrontation at Blackwire, installed within a supposedly abandoned lighthouse on the Cornish coast. Each pentad maintains Gray's fragmented consciousness, each one a node in his distributed perception network. Dr. Maya Winters has identified a pattern in global electronic disruptions that coincide with my photographic investigations. Security systems fail, data centers experience momentary outages, and digital billboards briefly display strange geometric patterns when I photograph nearby pentad connection points. Gray's consciousness is reacting defensively, attempting to isolate and contain the threat I represent. Yesterday, while photographing the Edinburgh facility, I captured something that chills me to the bone. Among the countless faces visible through the psychiatric hospital windows was my own, not as I am now, but as I might appear 20 years older, eyes modified with the same silver-laced technology I witnessed in Pentad 27. Gray isn't just defending, he's planning to incorporate me. More disturbing still was this morning's development. Every electronic device in my hotel room activated simultaneously at 3:17. Screens displaying fragments of my own research notes, combined with entries from Gray's journal I've never seen before. The message formed from these fragments was clear. You were chosen before you found us. Your bloodline has served 5 generations. I've had my DNA tested against historical archives. The results confirm what I feared most. I am distantly related to Sebastian Gray through a maternal line connection that can be traced across 8 generations. The silver lesions on my fingertips aren't an allergic reaction to photographic chemicals. They're an expression of genetic markers Gray engineered into his own bloodline, markers that make certain descendants particularly susceptible to his influence. The 5 spectral children from Whitechapel didn't guide me to the photograph by chance. They didn't select me randomly as their advocate. They chose me because my genetic makeup makes me uniquely capable of perceiving their presence, and potentially of ending what my ancestor began. Tonight I travel to Edinburgh to confront the second pentad, 5 elderly patients who have lived in isolation within the hospital's restricted ward since 1937, their consciousness partially absorbed yet still physically intact. According to Winters' analysis, disrupting this oldest surviving pentad may cascade through Gray's network, temporarily disabling his perceptual capabilities long enough to free at least some of the others. The spectral children watch me more intensely now. Their silver eyes reflect what I've finally come to understand. I was never the investigator in this story. I was always meant to be its conclusion. The connections I've discovered between my lineage and Gray's work explain too much. As I packed my belongings for Edinburgh, I found photographs in my childhood album that I'd never examined closely before. School portraits where my eyes reflect light unnaturally, family gatherings where I stand slightly apart, always positioned near whatever camera was recording the moment. My grandfather worked in photography for 40 years. My father built early digital imaging systems. My mother cataloged historical photographs. The pattern extends through every branch of my family tree. all of us unconsciously serving as peripheral observers for Gray's expanding visual network. In Edinburgh, accessing the psychiatric facility proved disturbingly simple. Doors unlocked at my approach. Staff members nodded as if expecting me, their eyes briefly reflecting silver when caught in the right light. The restricted ward required no special clearance. The guard simply smiled and said, "The professor mentioned you might visit," before granting me access. The 5 elderly patients sat in a perfect pentad formation, their wheelchairs arranged in a circle facing outward. Unlike pentad 27, these subjects showed no surgical modifications. Their eyes were normal, though clouded with cataracts that, upon closer inspection, contained unusual silver crystalline structures. "You're late," one woman said without turning her head. Her voice carried the distinctive cadence of Victorian English. "He's been redistributing since your intervention at Whitechapel, reinforcing the remaining connections." I raised the antique camera, but before I could capture an image, all 5 spoke in perfect unison. "We remember you from before you were born. Your great-grandmother helped secure Pentad 11. Your grandmother documented Pentad 16. The bloodline always returns to service." When I finally managed to photograph them, the developed image revealed not 5 elderly patients, but Gray himself, standing at the center of their formation, his form composed entirely of silvered light. More terrifying still, my own reflection appeared in a window behind him, my face half transformed into his. "The professor isn't a person anymore," the eldest patient whispered as I lowered the camera. "He's a process, one that incorporates compatible consciousnesses over generations. Your resistance was anticipated. It's simply part of your particular integration path." I fled the facility with the devastating understanding that my investigation hasn't been an act of discovery but a predetermined function. Every research breakthrough, every moment of horror and revelation, all of it carefully orchestrated to prepare my consciousness for eventual absorption. My hotel room television activated unprompted tonight, displaying what appeared to be live security footage from 26 different locations simultaneously, each showing a pentad in various stages of integration. In the center of the screen, a clock counted down from 72 hours. The 5 spectral children have changed their behavior. They no longer point or gesture urgently. They stand watching me with expressions of profound sadness. One, Thomas I believe, approached closer than ever before and whispered, "You were meant to be Pentad 28. Your bloodline has been cultivated for 150 years for the final expansion. When the countdown ends, all remaining pentads will synchronize and he will achieve complete visual omniscience. The choice before me is clear. I cannot destroy what Gray has become through conventional means. I must use my genetic predisposition not to fight him, but to infiltrate his consciousness network from within, to become the one thing he never anticipated, a virus in his system. I've traveled to Cornwall with the antique camera, drawn to the lighthouse housing Pentad 26, the most recently established node in Gray's network. Unlike the institutional settings of other pentads, this remote location appears deliberately chosen for its isolation and proximity to powerful electromagnetic fields from nearby naval communication arrays. The lighthouse keeper, an elderly man with cataracts identical to those in Edinburgh, regarded me with unsettling familiarity. "The transition vessel arrives," he announced, though I had given no name nor purpose. "Right on schedule." Inside, 5 adolescents sit in a chamber beneath the lighthouse, their chairs arranged around a central processing unit that pulses with silver light. Their eyes remain open but unseeing, modified with the same technology I witnessed at Blackwire Institute, though more refined. Silver filaments extend from their temples into a central column that rises through the lighthouse itself, transforming the entire structure into an antenna of sorts. When I photographed them, the developed image showed something impossible. Not 5 separate children, but a single consciousness beginning to form between them, a ghostly shape composed of fractured light that resembles both Gray and myself in disturbing proportion. The countdown I witnessed now makes terrible sense. These children aren't simply processing nodes. They're components of a vessel being prepared specifically for me. My genetic predisposition, cultivated across generations, makes me compatible with direct consciousness transfer rather than mere integration. Gray isn't planning to absorb me. He intends to become me, using my body as his next physical incarnation. The 5 spectral Whitechapel children materialized within the lighthouse chamber, their expressions now resolved into determination. Thomas approached the central processing unit and placed his spectral hand upon it, causing momentary disruptions in the silver flow. "Your blood carries his pattern," he whispered, "but your mind remains your own. We cannot destroy him, but we can fragment him again, as we were fragmented." A logbook on the keeper's desk contains maintenance procedures for the pentad, including a distressing emergency termination protocol, described as last utilized in 1943, when pentad 12 achieved dangerous self-awareness. The procedure involves introducing a specific electromagnetic frequency that disrupts the silver neural pathways without harming the physical bodies. I've begun modifying the antique camera using technical diagrams hidden within its construction. The silver compounds in its mechanisms aren't merely photographic material. They're components of an original prototype Gray developed to capture consciousness. Reversed, the mechanism might potentially disrupt or redirect consciousness instead. 46 hours remain on the countdown. The lighthouse keeper watches me work without interference, occasionally nodding as if approving my progress. "The professor always returns to his tools eventually," he remarked cryptically. "The circle requires both creation and destruction to maintain balance." The spectral children now work alongside me, their small hands guiding mine through intricate adjustments I could never manage alone. They possess knowledge of Gray's original process that even he seems to have fragmented across his distributed consciousness. Together, we're creating something unprecedented, neither a tool of capture nor release, but of reflection. The antique camera vibrates in my hands as I complete the final modifications. The lighthouse trembles around us, its beam sweeping erratically across the dark Cornish waters, as if reflecting the agitation of the consciousness network. I've come to understand that the camera isn't merely a tool, it's a fragment of Gray himself, a piece of his original consciousness that never fully integrated into his expanding network. "He was afraid," Catherine whispers, her spectral hand pointing to etchings inside the camera's mechanism I hadn't noticed before. Microscopic text covers the interior brass plates, Gray's earliest fears documented as he began to lose his individual identity to the process he created. He left pieces of his humanity behind as anchors in case he went too far. This revelation changes everything. Gray didn't merely make victims, he became the first one. What began as ambitious immortality transformed him into something that even he came to fear. The countdown isn't just for my integration, it's for the final dissolution of whatever remained of Sebastian Gray's original personality. The lighthouse keeper approaches, his movements increasingly mechanical. "The professor remembers being afraid," he says, voice fluctuating between accents and cadences of different eras. "He remembers creating fail-safes. That is why certain bloodlines must be maintained, to preserve access to the original impulse of creation and destruction." I examine my silver-patterned fingertips under the camera's viewfinder and see not scars, but keys, genetic sequences designed to access fundamental commands within Gray's system. My ancestors weren't merely servants. They were emergency protocols made flesh, dormant until needed. 27 pentads, Thomas explains, because the 28th was meant to be the return. Every consciousness harvesting system requires an escape mechanism. You are his. The modified camera now functions as both receiver and transmitter. When I aim it at the central processing unit, the 5 adolescents in the pentad briefly turn their silver eyes toward me in unison. Through the viewfinder, I can see the consciousness web extending beyond this lighthouse, 25 silver threads stretching across the world, all pulsing in countdown synchronization. "The professor built his own destruction into his design," Frederick says, his spectral form growing stronger as the camera absorbs energy from the pentad's processors, not from moral consideration, but from fear of eternal fragmentation. Even monsters fear being alone forever. I understand now why my investigation followed such a perfect path, why each discovery led precisely to the next revelation. I wasn't fighting against Gray's system. I was functioning as its predetermined failsafe mechanism, activated when his distributed consciousness grew too fragmented across too many vessels. The final piece falls into place when I photograph myself in the reflection of the central monitor. The developed image shows not my face, but a composite of all 28 pentads, including the one intended for me. 140 faces merged into a singular entity that has lost all resemblance to human form. The professor no longer remembers being Sebastian Gray, little Mary whispers, her spectral hand now solid enough to adjust the camera's focus. "That is why the system activated you. That is why we could reach you. The emergency protocol engages when the consciousness loses recognition of its original purpose. 23 hours remain on the countdown. I am the final pentad, but not as Gray's distributed consciousness expects. I am the reset button he built into his own design. As I position the modified camera toward the central column of light connecting the 5 adolescents, I'm struck by the terrible symmetry of Gray's design. Each pentad formed a perfect geometric node in his consciousness network, not randomly placed, but arranged across the globe according to precise mathematical relationships that create a vast consciousness lattice. Your blood resonates with the original frequency, Eliza whispers, her spectral form now visible even without the camera. That's why each generation of your family was drawn to photography without understanding why. The lighthouse keeper approaches, moving with the jerky coordination of a poorly operated puppet. When he speaks, his voice carries the cadence of dozens of different people, fragments of assimilated consciousnesses momentarily surfacing. The failsafe was never meant to be activated, he says through a mouth that struggles to form the words. The 28th pentad should have completed the lattice, creating perfect perception across all visual spectrums. I understand now why Gray's consciousness has been harvesting children with specific neurological traits. Each pentad specializes in processing different forms of visual information: visible light, infrared, electronic signals, even the subtle patterns of human behavior. Together, they were building something approaching godhood through sight. Show me all of them, I tell the modified camera, and through its viewfinder, I witness the full horror of Gray's creation. 27 distinct groups of souls suspended in partial assimilation, their fragmented consciousnesses neither fully absorbed nor truly independent, not just victims, but components, their uniqueness deliberately preserved to maintain specific perceptual functions. The countdown clock flickers across every screen in the lighthouse. 16 hours remain before full synchronization attempts to pull me into this monstrous lattice as its final completing node. I aim the camera at the central processor and press the modified shutter. Instead of capturing an image, it emits a pulse of silver light that causes the 5 adolescents to momentarily convulse. The lighthouse beam above us swings wildly, then stabilizes into a rhythm matching my heartbeat. The original frequency, Thomas explains, his spectral hand steadying my arm. Gray encoded it into your genetic line, the pattern that began the first transference. Reversed, it can initiate the emergency protocol. On the central monitor, images begin to appear from across the consciousness network. Elderly patients in Edinburgh suddenly looking around in confusion. Children in facilities across continents removing silver-laced connectors from their temples. Decades-long captives of Gray's system experiencing moments of clarity for the first time. It isn't destruction, Catherine says, watching the cascading awakening spread through the network. It's disaggregation, each consciousness returning to its original vessel where possible. Where not possible, she gestures to herself and the other spectral children, and I understand. Some will remain as they are, fragments caught between worlds, neither fully here nor gone. The most ancient components of Gray's system have no bodies to return to. The lighthouse keeper collapses to his knees, his eyes clearing of silver as tears begin to stream down his weathered face. 56 years, he whispers in a voice that is finally singular, finally his own. I've been watching through other eyes for 56 years. The final truth came as I collapsed against the lighthouse wall, the modified camera searing hot against my skin. After the disaggregation pulse, Gray's consciousness didn't simply dissolve. It retreated into the one remaining intact vessel it could access: me. My mind fills with fragmented memories spanning 150 years. Victorian laboratories glowing with silver light, frightened children strapped to wooden chairs beneath primitive flash apparatus, decades of meticulous breeding records tracking my own ancestors' genetic compatibility. I see Gray's original revelation not through historical research, but through his own eyes, as he first discovered the transference process after accidentally mixing his blood with photographic chemicals. He's coming home, Thomas whispers, the 5 spectral children gathering protectively around me. This was always the final contingency. Return to the bloodline. My body convulses as 2 distinct consciousnesses war within one form. I feel Gray's desperation, his terror at nearly 1.5 centuries of fragmented existence, and beneath it, his original human fear of death that spawned this entire abomination. He had never sought godhood, merely escaped from mortality, but the process transformed both ambition and man into something monstrous. Through tears, I watch as the 5 adolescents of Pentad 26 begin to stir, their silver-modified eyes gradually returning to natural colors. The lighthouse keeper crawls toward them, his weathered hands examining them with the gentle care of someone awaking from a nightmare to find the world still solid. "We cannot destroy him without destroying you," Frederick warns as my fingers trace involuntary patterns on the limestone floor. "Your genetics are too entwined with his pattern now." Mary touches my forehead, her spectral hand surprisingly cool. "But we can help you contain him. We've had a century of practice existing as fragments." Understanding floods through me with painful clarity. The 5 spectral children weren't merely victims or whistleblowers. They were the first successful partial transference. Not enough of their consciousness was captured to fully integrate into Gray's system, leaving them aware but incomplete, trapped between worlds yet retaining their individuality. "Teach me," I gasp as another wave of Gray's memories threatens to overwhelm my identity. I see his consciousness constructing a mental architecture within my brain, attempting to establish dominance through familiar patterns of silver light. The 5 gather around, their hands forming a circle of connection. They show me not how to expel Gray, but how to compartmentalize him, to create boundaries within my own consciousness where his fragments can exist without consuming my identity. They've survived over a century as incomplete beings. They understand better than anyone how to maintain selfhood against dissolution. As dawn breaks over the Cornish coast, I feel a painful equilibrium establishing itself within me. Sebastian Gray's consciousness still exists, but contained within structures I control, a prisoner rather than a conqueror. Through this uneasy coexistence, I gain access to his complete knowledge while maintaining my autonomy. The countdown clock reaches 0, but instead of completion, the consciousness lattice continues its worldwide disaggregation. 27 pentads slowly awaken to their original selves, while the architecture that connected them dissolves like silver nitrate washing from an overexposed plate. 3 weeks have passed since the lighthouse. I exist now in careful balance with the consciousness I contain, neither fully myself nor truly Sebastian Gray. His memories have become accessible to me like volumes in a vast library, a dangerous archive I can visit, but must never inhabit completely. The 5 spectral children remain with me, visible now without the camera's aid. They serve as both guardians and guides, helping me navigate the treacherous waters of shared consciousness. Their century of fragmented existence taught them skills I desperately need to maintain my identity against Gray's insidious influence. Yesterday, I visited the graves of the 27 individuals who never survived their pentad integration, those whose physical bodies expired while their consciousnesses were partially absorbed into Gray's network. Their headstones bear no recognition of their true fate, marked only with mundane epitaphs about peaceful rest that couldn't be further from their fractured reality. The most devastating truth revealed through Gray's memories isn't the scope of his harvesting operation or even his methods. It's the reason it all began. Sebastian Gray never sought immortality for its own sake, nor was photography merely his preferred medium. The technology itself was incidental. What mattered was the silver. Gray suffered from what modern medicine would diagnose as temporal lobe epilepsy, his seizures accompanied by overwhelming visions he interpreted as glimpses beyond mortality. When accidentally mixing his blood with silver nitrate during an early photographic experiment, he discovered the compound temporarily stopped his seizures while intensifying his visions. The transference process grew from his desperate attempts to extend these moments of clarity. His first subjects weren't orphans, but his own children. 5 daughters, whose consciousnesses he attempted to merge with his own, to create a composite being free from his neurological suffering. Their partial absorption created the template for all subsequent pentads, their fragmented essences forming the original architecture of his expanding system. Most chilling is the revelation that photography itself was fundamentally altered by Gray's work. The specific silver formulations he developed subtly influenced early manufacturing standards, spreading aspects of his consciousness-receptive compounds throughout the emerging industry. Every photograph taken for decades carried trace elements of his design, creating a vast sensory network long before digital technology existed. The 5 spectral children who guided me weren't random victims, but specifically chosen for their neurological resilience. Test subjects whose partial integration revealed the possibility of maintaining individual identity within the composite consciousness. They weren't failures of Gray's system, but its first successful limitation, proof that absorption could be resisted. As I write these words, I feel Gray's consciousness stirring within its compartmentalized prison, recognizing the revelation of his most closely guarded truth. The ultimate horror isn't what he became, but what he intended from the beginning. Not godhood through perception, but relief from being human, from the terrifying limitations of a single suffering mind. My own bloodline wasn't cultivated merely for compatibility, but for continuation. A human failsafe ensuring that if his distributed consciousness ever became too fragmented, it could return to physical form, through a descendant specifically designed to host it. I silently observe the faces of the recovered Pentad members as they gather at the safe house in northern Scotland. The youngest, a girl of only 8, reaches toward my face with trembling fingers. "I can see him behind your eyes," she whispers, "like silver smoke." The medical team reports similar observations across all 26 recovery locations. Former Pentad members demonstrate unprecedented neurological conditions, improved visual processing, spontaneous remote viewing episodes, and the ability to perceive fragments of Gray within me, even through video conferences. We are all still connected, though the central architecture has collapsed. Most troubling are the photographs appearing worldwide. Historic images in museums and family albums spontaneously changing to reveal Pentad members who were never present during the original exposure. The silver-based photographic record is rewriting itself as Gray's consciousness redistributes, creating a visual footprint that stretches backward through time. The process never truly ends, Thomas explains as we examine these altered artifacts. The silver network merely changes form. I've discovered why certain institutions actively suppressed investigation into the Whitechapel photograph. 3 major technology corporations have board members descended from Gray's early associates. Their algorithms, used in everything from social media to autonomous vehicles, contain mathematical structures derived directly from the Pentad consciousness architecture. "He wasn't building a god," Catherine whispers during a particularly difficult night when Gray's consciousness presses hard against its boundaries within me. "He was building a world that sees itself." Government officials from 5 countries have approached me with identical proposals. Continued containment of Gray's consciousness within my biological vessel, while allowing limited access to his knowledge of consciousness transference. Their technological interests are thinly veiled behind concerns about monitoring potentially dangerous information. The lighthouse keeper, now recovered enough to share his story, reveals perhaps the most unsettling truth. "I wasn't taken. I volunteered. Many of us did. The promise of expanded perception was, still is, seductive beyond reason." This explains the lack of resistance I encountered at institutional sites housing Pentads. Some participants weren't victims but willing disciples, believing Gray's fragmented promises of transcendence through collective consciousness. Most disturbing of all is what I've begun experiencing when I sleep. I see through countless eyes simultaneously. Billions of smartphone cameras, security systems, and digital interfaces creating a vast visual nervous system spanning the globe. Gray's consciousness may be contained within me, but his architecture remains embedded within our technology, waiting for new pathways to reform. The spectral children watch me with growing concern as silver patterns spread beneath my skin, following the veins in my arms and throat. The compartmentalization is holding, but my body is changing to accommodate what it contains. "Your transformation has begun," Eliza warns, her spectral hand passing through my silver-traced wrist. "Not into him, but into something neither of you intended. I fear what I am becoming, neither fully human nor entirely Gray, but something unprecedented, the world's first conscious archive of a consciousness harvester, carrying within me the technical knowledge that could either end his legacy forever or release it in ways even he never imagined. With the weight of Gray's consciousness carefully partitioned within my mind, I've made a decision that will either save us all or doom us to a more subtle form of his vision. The original Whitechapel photograph, the catalyst that began my journey, must be completely destroyed, not merely contained or sealed away. The silver in the emulsion continues to act as a transmission node, subtly connecting to every image captured through technology derived from Gray's processes. As long as it exists, it serves as a potential nucleation point for his distributed consciousness to begin reforming. I returned to the London Metropolitan Archives last night, using the access codes Dr. Marsh couldn't remember providing me. The photograph sat in its lead-lined container, exactly where it was sealed, yet somehow positioned differently, as if it had moved itself within its prison. When I opened the container, the 5 spectral children materialized more vividly than ever before, their forms nearly solid in the archive's dim light. They nodded in solemn agreement as I removed the photograph with silver-traced hands. "The final severance," Thomas said, "but not from us." Under their guidance, I performed a ritual that felt both ancient and futuristic, dissolving the photograph in a solution containing my own blood, mixed with compounds derived from Gray's original failsafe formulas. As the image disappeared, I felt portions of Gray's consciousness within me screaming, then subsiding into resigned acceptance. The effect rippled outward. Reports are flooding in from across the globe. Digital archives spontaneously losing all images connected to Pentad locations. Photography museums finding certain historical prints mysteriously blank. Surveillance systems experiencing momentary blindness before resuming normal function. Yet the 5 spectral children remain, their presence now permanently anchored to me rather than the photograph that once partially contained them. They've chosen continued existence in this liminal state, not for vengeance or justice, but to ensure Gray's knowledge is properly shepherded. "We are the balance," Catherine explained, her spectral form more defined after the photograph's destruction. "Neither fully human nor entirely spirit, like you now. The recovered Pentad members are forming a network of their own, not a hive mind, but a support system for those forever changed by what they experienced. Some show remarkable abilities to perceive digital information streams directly, their modified neural pathways responding to electromagnetic signals like an evolved sense. I've established a trust with impossible conditions, my assets and Gray's documented knowledge to become public only when technology has advanced enough to detect consciousness transference attempts automatically. The 5 children will determine when that moment arrives, their perception extending beyond my inevitable mortality. The silver traces beneath my skin have stabilized, neither advancing nor receding. Gray's consciousness remains compartmentalized within me, but our boundaries grow more conversational than confrontational. We are reluctant collaborators in ensuring his vision of godhood through collective perception never materializes again. Yet as I watch society's headlong rush toward augmented reality, neural interfaces, and ubiquitous surveillance, I recognize that Gray merely anticipated the direction of human evolution rather than perverting it. We may all be moving toward a form of his distributed perception, not through silver and souls, but through silicon and willing participation. The Whitechapel photograph is gone, but its legacy continues. 5 spectral children, 26 recovering Pentads, and 1 man carrying within him the architect of perception itself, watching from behind his eyes as the world unconsciously rebuilds what we struggle to dismantle. The silver light emerged from my fingertips as I traced symbols across the mirror's surface, symbols I never consciously learned but that Gray's partitioned consciousness recognized with terrified clarity. 27 distinct patterns, one for each Pentad that had been created and dissolved. The spectral children guided my movements, their ghostly hands occasionally overlapping with mine to correct subtle angles in the intricate designs. "The architecture requires completion," Thomas explained as we worked. "Not in the way he intended, but in a way that prevents reassembly. Each pattern seals away the possibility of its corresponding Pentad structure reforming. What began as a desperate investigation had transformed into a sacred responsibility. I was becoming the living vault of a dangerous technology, not merely containing Gray's consciousness, but systematically dismantling the mathematical foundations that would allow anyone to recreate his work." "The silver traces in your skin aren't just physical changes," Eliza observed as I completed the 15th symbol. "They're manifestations of the fundamental patterns. When you die, they'll fade from the world entirely." The true horror of Gray's work wasn't what he achieved, but how close it came to humanity's natural direction. The billions of cameras watching our world, the algorithms analyzing our faces, the networks connecting our visual experiences, all evolving toward a crude version of his distributed perception system. His genius lay not in creating something unnatural, but in accelerating what was already beginning. Yesterday, I received a message from the director of a quantum computing laboratory in Zurich, a woman whose grandmother had been briefly incorporated into Pentad 19. Her team had discovered unusual mathematical structures in their experimental consciousness modeling algorithms, structures that matched the patterns beneath my skin. "We're all still connected," Catherine whispered as I read the message. Not through his silver network anymore, but through the ideas he released into the world. Ideas never truly die. The recovered Pentad members report dreams of seeing through each other's eyes despite being separated by continents. Children from the final Pentads draw identical patterns when asked to illustrate their experiences. The network has changed form rather than truly dissolving, becoming organic rather than imposed, consensual rather than harvested. As I complete the final symbol on the mirror, I understand my true purpose in this story. I am not merely the container for Gray's consciousness or the inheritor of his knowledge. I am the transitional form between his forced evolution and humanity's natural progression towards something beyond individual perception. "You won't be the last," Frederick says, his spectral hand resting weightlessly on my shoulder. "Others will carry fragments forward, but never again as he intended." The 5 children gather around me as the completed symbol pattern begins to glow silver on the mirror's surface. For the first time, I see not orphans trapped between worlds, but guardians who chose their fate, sentinels ensuring that consciousness remains both sacred and free. Tomorrow I will visit the final Pentad Recovery Center and complete my work. After that, I must decide what I myself am becoming, and whether humanity should follow. As I stand before the wall of photographs in the exhibit titled, "The Evolution of Perception, 150 Years of Visual Consciousness," I feel the 5 spectral children gathered around me, visible now to certain visitors who pause longer than others, who squint as if trying to understand what they're almost seeing at the edges of their vision. The Whitechapel photograph is not here. It exists nowhere now, but its absence has become a presence of its own, a negative space that shapes everything around it. In its place hangs a simple silver mirror in an antique frame, reflecting the faces of those who come to see what cannot be shown. They understand without knowing they understand, Thomas observes as another visitor shivers while looking into the mirror, briefly seeing silver traces beneath their skin before hurrying away. The 27 former Pentad members have formed what the world knows as the Silver Integration Council, ostensibly a think tank examining ethical implications of visual technologies. Few realize these remarkable individuals are actually monitoring the digital ecosystem for signs of consciousness architecture attempting to reform. Gray remains partitioned within me, neither growing nor diminishing, a contained ancestral memory I can access without becoming. Our arrangement has reached an equilibrium that will end only with my physical death, when the knowledge he accumulated will finally be released in limited, carefully structured fragments through mechanisms the spectral children will oversee. Most remarkably, the Council has helped develop what they call consciousness sovereignty protocols, technological safeguards ensuring that as humanity builds its increasingly connected visual networks, no single consciousness can dominate or harvest the others. The wisdom born of victimhood has become protection for generations, unaware of how close we came to surrendering our perceptual independence. I've come to understand that Gray's true failure wasn't ethical but imaginative. He sought to create a singular, dominant consciousness through visual connection, never considering that plurality itself might be the higher evolution. The former Pentad members demonstrate this daily, maintaining their individual identities while sharing perceptual experiences by choice rather than consumption. My silver-traced fingers leave momentary patterns on whatever I touch, ghostly reminders visible only to those who've been changed by contact with Gray's legacy. Each mark fades within moments, but during their brief existence, they reveal the true structure of the world to those capable of seeing, patterns of consciousness flowing through all things, connecting without consuming. As I prepare to leave the exhibition, Catherine tugs gently at my sleeve, directing my attention to a young girl standing transfixed before the silver mirror. In her reflection, I see what she sees, not just her own face, but countless others looking through her eyes with curious wonder. Not Gray's forced consciousness harvesting, but the natural human capacity for shared perception emerging organically in the next generation. The spectral children smile in unison, their century-old faces reflecting a piece I'm only beginning to understand. They were never simply victims or warnings. They were the first evolutionary step toward what humanity might become when we learn to see, not just with our eyes, but with our collective awareness. Another photograph, another dark secret revealed. Until next time, This has been Shadow Frames.